All right, I'm very close to done here. What I'm going to do is now go around the horn here, around the room, and just tell you different constellations you can expect to see at different times of year. So we have seasonal constellations, and we have others that you can see all year round. Okay, the ones that you can see all year round are the ones I listed right there. They're referred to as what's called circumpolar. You recognize that as the basis of circumference. So that makes a circle around the North Pole there. Okay. So what I'm going to reference is, for now, circumpolar constellations. All right. They're the ones that will be visible or are visible all year long. Doesn't matter what season it is. And it's because their declination is high enough such that as the Earth rotates and revolves, they never do get low enough to go completely below the horizon. So, folks, in the northern hemisphere, mid-northern latitudes, no matter what time of year it is, you can always look up and see Ursa Major. Now, there's times a year where it gets very low in the sky and times of the year when it's very high in the sky. But Ursa Major, which is, the Big Bear, that's what the asterism of the Big Dipper is located inside. Remember, a constellation is a designated, accepted shape of stars. An asterism is an easily recognizable pattern, but it's not necessarily an official constellation. So that's the difference. Ursa Major is the Big Bear. Now, Ursa Minor is the Little Bear. You may recognize this as the Little Dipper, as its nickname. And I'll show you or tell you some other significant stars in each of these constellations later on. But hopefully you know one very important star that is in that constellation. Draco is a constellation that you can see year round. You've probably looked towards it countless number of times in your life and didn't even realize you were looking at it. It's a very faint constellation, and it's very large. It takes up a lot of space in the sky, but very faint, very nondescript. You probably don't even realize it. Now, Cassiopeia is how you pronounce that word. Cassiopeia is a pretty famous constellation. It's very easily recognizable. It looks kind of like a funky looking W. But again, at different times a year, you'll see it in different orientations. So sometimes it's W, sometimes it's an M, sometimes it's like a backwards number 3. But it just depends different. But you'll be able to see it year round, and we'll talk a little bit more about the significance of each of those. Now, Cepheus is how that's pronounced. Cepheus is another pretty nondescript constellation. It's not the brightest. There's not a lot going on with it, but there is one very significant star in Cepheus called Delta Cephei. But anyway, we will learn a little more about the significance of that because it became the basis of a lot of astronomical math. All right. But anyway, I'm going to go around the room. And as I go around the room, you're not going to hear me say Big Dipper or Little Dipper, or whatever, because those are not seasonal constellations. Those you can see all year. And that, again, is the term circumpolar. Okay? All right. Remember, now, I'm sitting where the planet Earth would be located during the month of March, and the planet Earth would be orbiting from that direction, going this way to behind me, and then around the room that way, the way we've seen in several videos thus far. In March, the planet Earth is located in the constellation Libra as it travels around the ecliptic, which is that horizontal line I drew all the way around the room. All of the planets and the sun will always travel along that ecliptic. And during the month of March, the planet Earth is in the constellation Libra. Remember, if we look towards the sun during the daytime, or as the sun is rising, which again, when I turn the sun on, we're going to go look that way. The sun will appear to be in the constellation Aries. And that constellation, again, would be visible, but it's only during the daytime. And if you go stargazing, well, I recommend going at night. Gonna want to go at night. And so what we're going to do then is focus on what stars are opposite the sun. And that's what you do for stargazing. Focus on what stars are opposite the sun, not what stars are towards the sun. Okay. Remember, in March, if I look towards the sun, what you remember is you will see the constellation Aries, which means I have to move this, because if I talk about the Earth in March, then what I have to do is look towards the sun in the morning to see where the sun is rising. And you can tell I'm trying to imitate the sun is rising in the background star of Aries, or background constellations of Aries. All right, that's when the Earth is experiencing the month of March, which again I'll show you like yay. So the Earth is in the month of March. The Earth itself is in the constellation Libra, but we're going to talk about stargazing and what we can see then for this particular guy. But what I'll do is actually start when the Earth is in September. All right, so I'm going to move 6 months from now. Well, actually, I can start it right now. It don't matter. Okay, why not? You guys can tell the folks on this side of the Earth are experiencing daytime. So if I look that way during the day, Aries will certainly be in the sky, but we won't be able to see it because, darn it, the sun's awfully bright. So what we have to do is focus on the folks who are on the opposite side, the nighttime side of the Earth, to look towards the background constellation stars. Okay, that's what we're talking about. March, towards the end of March, then, is the beginning of springtime, obviously. So as the Earth moves, going from March, it keeps rotating like this, right? And it goes to June, which, again, you remember, still have the same setup. You know, that's towards the sun there, but that's where June is located. So somewhere in the region between March and June is where we will see this season's constellations. But the thing of it is, you have to look that way, not towards the sun, away from the sun, nighttime for stargazing. Okay? Well, the first one I ended up writing, or not the first one, but the one I have asterisked is Libra. Okay? That kind of defines the beginning of springtime when the Earth is in the constellation Libra. So if I look away from the sun, I'm looking towards that particular constellation. So at night, you can expect to see Libra. Now, it's a fairly nondescript constellation. It's meant to represent a scale. It's kind of like a triangle with two little things hanging from it. If you want to win a spelling bee, look up the two main stars in Libra and how to spell them. It would be interesting. But yeah, look up those names. Leo is another one, which you recognize. That's a lion. I'll tell you a little bit more about some significant stars in Leo a little later on. Virgo then is another zodiacal constellation. There is a significant star in the constellation Virgo I want you to remember. And this is a very funny word. It's pronounced Buotes. All right, Buotes. And there is a very bright star in that constellation also. But for springtime, what I want you to associate with these constellations, which is why you just wrote them down. And remember, we're kind of starting around here. Libra will be one of the first of the spring constellations to be visible. And as we keep going, this region of the sky here, this region of the sky is going to be where those constellations would be located. All right? What you probably can't see is over here where I have September and Libra written very darkly, which is good. Up above it, I have the number 12 And then over here, I have the number 13 and 14. So anyway, 12, 13, 14. Those represent right ascensions, which again is how far are we from the basically the March solstice or equinox. I'm sorry, the March equinox. Remember that defines 0 right ascension, and as you go around, right ascensions go from 0 to 24. And so if this represents March, well then over there, the exact opposite of March is September, 6 months later, or 6 months prior, or 6 months later. So remember over here where I wrote the September in the ecliptic, September here, March is when the sun is in Aries, but this represents the start of the basically the prime meridian, if you will. Then that is a right ascension of 0. We go from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the exact opposite where I ended up starting was at a right ascension of 12. So what I want you to associate with springtime constellations are right ascensions that are ish between 12 and 18. Okay, somewhere in the middle or in the range of 12 to 18, because springtime is when we're kind of halfway ish to 3/4 of the way ish through the year. Okay, that's springtime, because then, boom, once we get to the summer, remember how we define the start of summer. The start of summer is when somebody on Earth, summer in the northern hemisphere, can watch the sun rise and look towards the sun. And as it rises in those background constellations, that background constellation that the sun would appear in is Cancer. But then can you see, if you're somebody on the sun and you're looking towards the Earth is hanging out in the constellation Capricorn. Okay, so in June, the Earth is in Capricorn. In December, what I have written up there is when the sun appears in Capricorn. But what I'm going to do is pretend we're on planet Earth here, and I'm going to look on the side of the Earth that is opposite the sun. And this is the nighttime sky back there. It starts with a right ascension of 18, because we're now 3/4 of the way through that particular year. Now, the summer, that's a pretty busy stargazing season, because the weather's nice. It's fairly warm. It's kind of neat to go outside and look. So there's a lot of constellations to associate with summertime, because there's a lot going on. These first 3 form an asterism that I would like you to remember also, but Lyra, Cygnus, and Aquila. All right, those 3 constellations, Lyra, Cygnus, and Aquila, they each have a very significant star in them that together form another asterism that I will tell you about a little later on. But please remember these and associate them with summertime. Another very large constellation in the sky is that of Hercules. It's a pretty neat one. It's one that will be somewhat recognizable once you see it and can recognize the center part of it. This is a strange one, pronunciation. It's Ophiuchus. All right, so Ophiuchus is one that I would like for you to remember. It's a word for a doc. He was a doctor back in the folklore that generated that particular constellation. And then these ones you recognize as the zodiac. So in the summertime, Scorpius and Sagittarius are very, very prominent. I mean, you can see those fairly easily. Scorpius has a significant star in it. I'm going to want you to remember, and I'll get to that in the next video. And then Capricorn. Remember, Capricorn is what we can use to basically define the beginning of summertime as that. So these constellations would then take up the region in the sky that goes here in my classroom, gosh, I don't know, from June And remember, as the Earth is rotating, it keeps doing one of these, going like that. So the north hemisphere is still pointed there. So at night, we're pointing in all this direction. So all of this region, ceiling, floor, everything, that whole entire region of sky, from way up there to way down there, everything is going to be those particular constellations, all right? And then I'm going to get here, which is another location that you guys should be pretty familiar with by now. And that is when the planet Earth is in the month of September, okay? So we've gone through the summer months, that was from June, July, August, now we're into September. This is when the fall season is beginning. The Earth itself will intersect the constellation or be inside the constellation Aries. The sun will not be in Aries. The sun, I would have to look back towards the camera there to see the opposite side of the room. And that's when the sun would rise in Libra. And we would then start to say, okay, fall constellations, the ones in this region of the sky, the ones that have very, very low right ascensions, because you remember, this is a right ascension of 0. Then we start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 24. So those summer constellations, I want you to associate with fairly high right ascensions. Okay, the summer constellations, the right ascensions go up to 24. So if you have a right ascension that's 21, 22, 23, that's something that appears very, very late into the summertime. Those are just associate high numbered right ascensions with the summer. Okay. When we get to the fall, remember, here are those constellations I want you to remember for the fall. I didn't write them on the board because it's too far away for you guys to read on the cameras. That's why I wrote them on here. But Pegasus, you will be able to recognize Pegasus very, very easily. It's just a giant square in the sky. All right. And it's a very neat constellation. A lot of students are pretty impressed when they first learn how to recognize it. And Andromeda is another one I'm sure you've heard of, maybe in some science fiction type things, but Andromeda is a constellation. It is also a galaxy because, well, it's one of the first galaxies known, and it happens to be in that constellation. It's the closest galaxy to us, too, by the way. Auriga is another constellation that there's one kind of really neat star in Auriga, but beyond that, you probably haven't really heard of that one. Perseus, there's a really neat, interesting star inside the constellation Perseus as well. I'm going to have you remember. And Pisces, I just threw in there because it kind of shares a meridian with Pegasus. They're kind of right up above and below one another. And it's a zodiac constellation. Most students have heard of it at least. And then Aries, the reason I asterisked that one is, again, to please remember the significance of the constellations that really kind of mark these boundaries and where they're at. So back in the day, Aries had a right ascension of 0. Now, what I told you is nothing lasts forever, right? So, but does have a very low right ascension. Its right ascension is 3. So those constellations in that region of the sky with lower right ascensions as the Earth is going from fall into winter, from September to December. So in the sky in my classroom here, it would represent the region that goes basically from where the Earth is now through here, kind of, that drawing of the sun there, that's a model of the moon. There's a smiley face, a TV, anyway. All those could be regions in the sky that are occupied by the constellations I just told you about. And then I have more right ascension numbers written high up on the board there, which you probably can't really read on the screen. But what this then would be is I just wrote a right ascension of 4, and these are all ish. This could be a right ascension of 5, and I want it to be exactly opposite of where Capricorn is with an 18, and call that a 6, which is that's where June around June in Cancer. I had it lined up with 7, but ish on the board here. But what that means is 1/4 of the year, basically going from 0 to 6. And these are those fall constellations I just listed. So those various ones then bring us to the constellation Cancer, which that is when in December, the planet Earth is in that constellation. And so I'm going to put, again, the planet Earth right there in the month of December. And as we look and watch the sun rise, it will rise in the constellation Capricorn, which is behind the camera where you guys are looking from. And from the sun's perspective, the Earth is in the constellation Cancer. And folks, here on the nighttime side of the Earth, we'll see winter constellations. And those winter constellations are these. This is what the list I want you to associate with winter. The first one is probably the most famous constellation in the sky. It's Orion. There will be 2 stars in the constellation Orion that I want you guys to remember. Then you have Canis Major, the big dog, and Canis Minor, the little guy. But Canis Major has the brightest star in the nighttime sky, actually. The brightest of the stars that appear at night happens to be in Canis Major. So I want you to remember that one, that I'll give you the name of a little later on. Canis Minor is the 2 little hunting dogs that accompany Orion. Taurus is a zodiacal constellation. It represents a bull. It's got a very interesting star associated with it. Gemini is another very easily, well, actually, these are all very easily recognized constellations. Orion is a very easy one to spot. The 2 dogs are very, very easy to spot. Taurus, once you see it, you're like, oh my God, it looks, you'll be able to see it. And Gemini, again, the twins, has 2 interesting stars, Castor and Pollux in it. But I want you to remember those 2 associated with Gemini. That is a constellation that's very easily recognizable, okay? The one that actually isn't very easily recognizable is the most significant of them, at least from a geometry standpoint, in terms of the lining up of everything. That the constellation that is Cancer, it's a very nondescript, very small, very dim constellation, but it just happens to be in a very special spot in the sky. All right, so these winter constellations then are what are visible from the nighttime side of the Earth, which is that far side of the Earth, as it's traveling from December into March, as it's going from December into March here. So moving from here as we keep the axis pointed in the same direction, doing one of these. Folks on the nighttime sky, they're seeing different regions in my classroom, right? There's a pinata, a couple pictures, a box over there, the floor tiles, the ceiling. Any of those regions in the sky could be occupied by these particular constellations. That's all a constellation is. It's just a region in the sky that's defined by those particular shapes. All right, so those winter constellations associate with kind of mid-number right ascensions, the 7, 8, 9s, 10s, 11s,